With preseason almost over, Mikel Arteta is getting an even finer understanding of his squad, and against Monaco we saw a debut for the £105 million man Rice, and an impressive performance from another new signing in Timber. In this 1-1 draw we also got a closer look at Arteta's tactics, and how his shiny new toys fit in, with some good and some bad on display. So let's take a closer look at these tactics, beginning with Arsenal in possession. When Arsenal were in deeper possession, Monaco were not too aggressive with their press, instead lining up with a narrow front three. The main goal of this front three was to remain fairly narrow and compact in order to prevent the side being overloaded in the midfield, as if they had stayed higher, there was potential for a 3 versus 2 in this midfield region. However, as the ball became active, Monaco would be forced to engage, either with Ben Yedder looking to sit deeper on one of the midfielders, with the wingers pressing ahead of him, or alternatively, Ben Yedder would look to begin the press and try to filter Arsenal to one side of the pitch. Either way, the end result was that the front three could not remain as narrow and compact as they were before, and Arsenal could begin to now use that midfield advantage that they had. In these phases, we could see the Monaco double pivot look to be much more aggressive and man-oriented on Arsenal's own double pivot of Rice and Partey, who in these phases could operate much more traditionally. This now opened up the opportunity for a midfielder higher up, primarily Smith Rowe, to explore this space behind the front two, looking to create an angle where a centre-back or Ramsdale could attempt a much more adventurous pass and look to find them between the lines and break that front five press of Monaco's. But of course, having that back three for Monaco meant that they could be comfortable looking to commit the extra man into the press to prevent Smith Rowe picking up the ball too easily in the midfield. So Arsenal had to find alternative solutions. And once again, we're seeing how flexible, continuing on from last season, as what we would often see is the double pivot of Arsenal looking to manipulate the man-oriented manner of Monaco's own pivots. And this could be either by staggering their double pivot with one man dropping deep and the other pushing higher up the pitch, but more commonly, Partey and Rice could split much wider, dragging the pivots with them, and either way, the end result was the same, with this massive channel created in the midfield for Nketiah to look to drop in and receive the pass to still have the same effect of breaking the lines. And if a centre-back did follow, there would be the potential for a runner to exploit that space. Although that's something we didn't see too often from the Gunners. More dynamic movement from the midfield or out wide could be useful in exploiting this space. Nketiah did fairly well in bringing others into play, but it's still a part of his game that could potentially be improved. But let's move higher up the pitch, where two of Arteta's new signings were shining. Firstly, I would like to highlight just some of the elements of Timber's game intelligence. A lot will be made of Timber's ability to invert into the midfield, which is impressive and important to the side, and we'll touch on that in a moment. However, what could be just as important is the way he is able to slot into the backline. And actually, a lot of Arsenal's play in this match began by looking to overload the right-hand side. And this would be through Tomiyasu pushing up much more like a traditional fullback, which we saw more often in this match. This would open up the opportunity for Vieira to also tuck in, while Smith Rowe was quickly across to increase this overload. Add to that Saliba being highly aggressive when receiving the ball in this region, as well as the pivots backing up this movement, and quickly Arsenal were able to create quite the overload on the right hand side. In these situations, if Timber always inverted into the midfield mindlessly, there would be a massive gap that could potentially be exploited by Monaco on the break. In addition, they would also lose a potential easy outlet down this left-hand side to begin the switch if the direct switch wasn't on to Martinelli. So instead, what we would see in these situations when the ball was on the right-hand side was Timber operating more like a left centre-back to give them that solidity and that option we just discussed. But the link-up play between Timber and Rice was perhaps the main attraction of this match. And this would be because, with this narrow front three, when Arsenal were building up, the wingers tended to be much more aggressive and man-oriented, particularly on Timber. So what we would often see is Timber somewhat tucking in, whether high up the pitch or deeper in these initial build-up phases. and what this would naturally do is drag the winger towards him, and now new angles were suddenly opened up. With Martinelli staying high and wide as he loves to do, Rice identified this space in the wide region as where he could do the most damage. The Monaco pivots had been fairly man-oriented on the Arsenal pivots, however, Fofana in this example be hesitant to follow Rice out into this situation, because as we discussed, Arsenal have that 3 versus 2 advantage in the midfield. So this would create the potential for Smith Rowe to receive in this region, or even in Nketiah as we saw him doing earlier, and this would lead to dangerous situations. So instead, Fofana preferred to protect the central zones. So what this meant is that Rice was often able to receive outside of the press, and now the options opened up depending on what Monaco did. Firstly, Declan Rice is an elite ball carrier, so he could potentially push the ball up the pitch and drag the entire side into the final third almost unchallenged. However, Monaco were fairly aggressive with their pressing at times in this match, so often in these situations, the fullback would be keen to close down Rice as quickly as possible. Now, that back 5 of Monaco would be forced to become a back 4, and this would mean that Martinelli would be in 1 versus 1 situations, and with Martinelli's pace and trickery, he was often able to get down the outside into dangerous zones. And even higher up the pitch, the principle could be similar, but there were some slight differences now, as what we would see is Timber inverting into the midfield, still drawing his man with him, and in these cases, Tomiyasu, where before he was operating as a traditional fullback, would then move deeper in order to create that lopsided back 3. And what this would now create once again is the opportunity for Rice to move wider. So, if the winger moved onto Rice, Timber would have time and space to initially receive the pass, and the end result would tend to be the same, with Timber finding Rice or Martinelli directly on the outside. And now, there were 2 versus 1 situations. And especially in that first half, time and again, we saw Martinelli drive into the box, drawing the fullback with him, and freeing up that space for Declan Rice on his left foot on the outside to get on the overlap and cross the ball. And this did lead to some promising scenarios for Arsenal. And even if Martinelli received 1 versus 1 in these scenarios, he would be happy to take on his man as well, as he had the beating of the wingback in this match. But no shape is perfect in football, and this actually left Arsenal looking quite vulnerable on the transition on more than one occasion, particularly down this right hand side, where Kiwior would have to do the covering on the transition, which wasn't always possible, and saw Monaco get into many promising positions. And Arsenal did not look watertight in defensive situations, even aside from the transitions. So let's take a look at a couple of the problems that popped up often. And in possession, Monaco were able to effectively utilize a lot of the natural advantages created by the 3-4-3 against the Arsenal shape, and this helped them to consistently break the lines, particularly from goal kick situations. This back 5 would quickly become a back 4, and what we would see is the right centre back shifting to right back, and the centre back splitting either side of the goalkeeper. This would then provide the scope for the wing back to push right up into a right wing position, freeing up the inside forwards to move inside the pitch. So what would happen is that when the wider centre back, who was now in a full back position, received, we saw early on that if Martinelli had been drawn onto the press on the centre back, Timber could be highly aggressive in looking to close him down, and this would now leave problems in the wider zones, as a man would potentially have space. So we did see Rice looking to drop in and cover on a couple of occasions, but this quickly became problematic as it would mean now one of the Monaco forwards could drop in and receive the line-breaking pass, and suddenly they were running almost at the back line. So if Rice stayed more central in his natural position, now the Arsenal backline will be forced across, potentially creating more gaps if Monaco were able to enact the switch. And speaking of the switch, this was a major ploy for Monaco, to get their wingbacks as high and wide as they could early on in the play. So that where before Arsenal had this natural 3 versus 2 advantage in the midfield, Lovin and Seguir then had the scope to move into these zones. With Arsenal only having a midfield 3 and Smith Rowe often looking to cover the deepest pivot, it would be a tough ask for Rice and Partey to be able to cover all of the angles created by the Monaco forwards. So we actually saw them fairly easily being able to break the lines time and again throughout the match, which is something that Arteta's side will need to improve on. One way they did look to do this was by tucking in both of their fullbacks so that they could more easily cover these central zones. But once again, the switches were massive for Monaco, and time and again, the pivots could play even no-look passes, looking for direct switches into their wingbacks as early as possible. And when the fullbacks were drawn out, as we saw down the right-hand side in particular with Tomiyasu, it would create space for a runner between the centre-back and the fullback. And we saw Saliba being dragged wider, and this looked like it could lead to danger for Arsenal. And this will probably be something Arteta looks to address. The hour mark saw a raft of changes, resulting in a lot of the momentum being lost. However, let's all remember that though pre-season can be informative, sometimes don't give too much weight on the result. But Arsenal definitely did struggle on the defensive transition at times, and Arteta will be hoping for more central creativity during the regular season. But what else did you notice during this match? Drop it down below. And the visuals for this video are provided by the wonderful Metrica Sports, which is an amazing video analysis platform for coaches, players, or anyone wanting to make analysis videos like myself. It allows you to create and share amazing telestrated analysis videos in an intuitive manner. And the best part is, if you want to check it out, by using the code FootballMadeSimple at checkout, you can get a nice 5% discount.